Oh boy! Now that I have some time to skip on my responsibilities and, for but a relatively brief moment, take my mind off the ever-growing dark void that is my life, let's watch some anime! But what to watch? Thankfully, I've written down every anime recommendation I've ever received and put them into this mini trash can. Let's see what we get. Something good. And compiler. Let's read the synopsis. When a world of 2D beings discovers the existence of our universe, they send a team of beautiful dominatrixes into our world to prepare it for total integration. However, once liberated from their flat and dreary 2D existence, Compiler and Assembler quickly discovered that cyber sex with a couple of 3D guys is a lot more fun than world conquest. Now, in between interfacing with their boyfriends, Assembler and Compiler must protect the Earth from being deleted by their former masters and an army of killer programs. I have a lot of questions, but they brought up beautiful Matrix androids and cyber sex, so I'm not gonna think right now, I'm just gonna go. And we're a single minute in, and I'm worried again. There's a lot to process here, so we begin the show with a scene from the 2D world. What makes this 2D world different from our own? Later on in the episode, our main characters are supposedly in the 3D world, which is pretty typical and normal looking, but more importantly, it's still 2D. You'd think maybe they would have it be live action if that's supposed to be the 3D world, so it's 3D instead of, both the 2D and 3D world being animated. And instead of telling us what the difference between the 2D and 3D world is, we're told nothing and only left to speculate. Since that's the case, let's try to process in this 1 minute scene what makes the 2D world different. Let's see, we have towers with squiggly lines all over them that give off electricity. We have some sort of cult or grand order of people with helmets and robes, and also just a couple of normal dudes strapped to a table that looks like technology. Are the robed beings not just normal people like the guys strapped to the table? If they are normal people, then why do they flap their arms like they have wings? And just like that, the scene is over and we will never again see any other scene from this 2D world. What now ensues is a couple of slice of life scenes setting up the day-to-day interactions with our main characters, the energetic Assembler and the mysterious aloof Compiler. And also their boyfriends, I guess, Toshi and Nachi. This series of scenes is interrupted when the antagonists, the two guys who were strapped onto the table in the 2D world, are sent into the 3D world as women. Women who can't speak Japanese and are confused of what language the people in the 3D world are speaking. Even though these are the same characters who have been in this 3D world 3 other times beforehand, as previously mentioned, but also who spoke and understood Japanese in the very first scene of this OVA. The characters even go from talking normal Japanese to talking in Japanese backwards for this one scene. They call the language the humans are speaking Osaka talk, because as it turns out, people in the Osaka region of Japan speak in a different dialect than the rest of the country. This, however, doesn't explain how or why the antagonists are unable to understand them at all, or cannot speak normal Japanese like they were just a few mere minutes beforehand, but rather than focusing on this one thing that is more than likely just a joke, let's move on. Since the antagonists are supposed to be androids, like our main characters, they're all able to use chips to change themselves, or also be able to manipulate the environment. In this scene, our antagonists use chips in order to speak Japanese again. But earlier, our main characters had used a chip to physically repair a broken picture frame, and even before that, a chip was used to create an explosion. So really, these things are just able to do whatever they please, it seems. For the remainder of this episode, we go between slice-of-life scenes and scenes where our antagonists, rather than dealing with the new ramifications of being turned into women, are trying to defeat our main characters. Hilarity ensues. Or I'm sure hilarity would ensue if I were able to keep up with the show's sense of humor, but I will say that's more of a cultural thing that some of the jokes aren't landing here. And then the jokes that I do understand are just not good. Here's the good stuff though. This is the level of writing I come to expect from something as golden as Compiler. A green-haired character who we've never seen before comes out of the background to explain to our main characters that the antagonists are super hybrid Terminators made with the Council's conversion technology from the 2D world, and that they are there to assassinate them. And then she walks off and just teleports away out of the scene, never be seen again in the entirety of the show. We are given no context of who she was, or what she was doing there, or how she just blipped out of existence, but she's gone now. So we have no choice but to accept it. But don't think about that too much, because now we have a kaiju fight between a real-life Japanese building and Colonel fucking Sanders. But then Colonel Sanders turns into a baseball player, beats the crap out of the antagonists, and then disappears into the horizon like a true hero. And that's the end of episode 1. Before we continue to episode 2, allow me to take a step back and try to help you understand why Colonel Sanders appeared in an anime and decided he would turn into a baseball player. The Hanshin Tigers are an underdog baseball team located in Japan, with fans that support them no matter how poorly they may play. But to everyone's surprise, in 1985, the Tigers were able to take what would become their one and only victory in the Japan series. This victory was largely thanks to Randy Bass, a white American who had been signed over to play with the Tigers in the early 80s, and a man with supposedly really thick arms. The fan base of the Tigers went absolutely mental after this victory, deciding it would be fun to yell out all the names of every player on the Tigers team, and then having someone who looked like that player jump from a bridge into a canal in Osaka. However, once they got to Randy Bass, they collectively had to think of a way to get an imitation of a white guy, so they saw that the best course of action would be to take a life-size statue of Colonel Sanders that stood outside of a KFC and throw it into the canal. Fans of the Tigers would be punished for this, but not by government officials or by the manager of the KFC, who I'm sure was really pissed that people just decided to collectively trash the property, but it's said that because the statue of Colonel Sanders was thrown into the canal and couldn't be recovered, that a curse was placed onto the Tigers. This would then explain the subsequent years of terrible performances by the Tigers. But I digress. So that's why the waters of a Japanese canal parted like the Red Seas from the Book of Exodus, and subsequently why a kaiju of Colonel Sanders came out of it, which then turned into an American baseball player who played on a Japanese team. If I didn't love being endlessly confused and frustrated by anime, I would probably stop here, but since this is way more appealing than doing anything actually productive, why not start episode 2? Episode 1 had many attempts at lighthearted and cultural humor, mixed in with the last third that focused on action and giant monster fights, but episode 2 suddenly takes a more serious tone, focusing on drama. Rather than having the bombastic couple having an over-the-top fight of why Toshi won't eat Assembler's disgusting cooking, we have a scene where they just sit on the couch together, wondering what they'll eat today, discussing that they're tired of instant food. Rather than Compiler having to deal with a couple of wacky assassins, she looks out the window, forlorn, thinking to herself, "Ugh, looks like it'll rain today." The sudden slow pacing feels absolutely agonizing as we wait for something to happen. Anything! But it never does. This episode's hook is centered around Compiler and her boyfriend, Nachi, who is suddenly her ex now, I guess? And he found another girlfriend. But we don't care about them as a couple, if they even were one originally. So there's nothing to grab onto for the entirety of this episode's duration. Also, Toshi is apparently cheating on Assembler with another woman. We aren't shown this ever, and it's never an important point for the episode, but it's just mentioned in passing. I cannot get over this tonal shift between episode 1 and 2. Silly wacky hijinks with Colonel Sanders kaiju! And then complex relationship drama that involves adultery and a man too immature to be forward and honest with what he wants. Instead, using pretty words in order to try to gain favor of any and every woman he comes across, just trying to get his dick wet. But then he realizes his mistake in that, perhaps, in his quest for lust, he may have hurt someone close to himself. He may have, because of his own foolishness, inadvertently ruined something that he had between another person. Something that cannot just be forgotten or forgiven. And it's not as though it should be forgiven, for every time he tries to talk to Compiler again, to try to reconnect with her like nothing had happened, he always reverts to his old ways of whoring himself out to anyone with a pulse. So far gone that he hardly remembers anyone's name or what he's done with who. Even bringing a girl he met at the bar to tears because he thinks he never met her before. It's almost like the show is trying to say something, especially considering the quote, A relationship between a man and a woman is very simple. It's so simple that we have to make it seem complicated sometimes. Except it's not trying to say anything because this is compiler, and none of these words mean anything. This whole episode doesn't even end with any resolution or with any character learning anything or growing. It's just 30 minutes of people floundering about. No one ever uses any chips either, the one thing separating them from the humans. So this might as well just be some soap opera in anime form, and they might as well just be humans since being androids adds nothing to the writing or scenario here. Oddly enough, not that I would know, but the episodes for compiler on Kiss Anime are backwards. That is to say, on Kiss Anime episode 1 is really episode 2, and episode 2 is really episode 1. I was able to fact check this since I now own a physical copy of compiler on VHS. Regrettably. It's worth mentioning that the English dub of compiler actually is a better experience? Technically? At the beginning of the OVA, they take extra time to overlay a few reused shots to give context onto what's going on with the 2D universe and who the main characters are before they get into the story. While I'm not one for exposition dumps, especially if it's front-loaded at the beginning of the story, this felt better having some context onto what the world is and what's going on, rather than having to figure out everything and learning nothing ourselves. Like what happens with the sub. Bonus points for the fact that Assembler's boyfriend is voiced by the same voice actor as Shinji Ikari from Evangelion. And even more bonus points for the dub because they took the time to explain the Colonel's curse at the end of the first episode, so audiences outside of Japan can retroactively be in on the joke as well. So while it's still utter crap, I give the dub the credit it deserves for at least trying its best. But that's all I have to say about compiler. Thank God it was only an hour long and there's no more of it. Quick! The thought of the responsibilities I'm ignoring by watching anime are starting to resurface. Quickly, grab another one before it's too late. What's this one? Call me tonight. Let's read the synopsis. Rumi's met a lot of guys through her job, and it's probably fair to assume that most of them could be said to have some sort of problem, but a man who literally turns into a beast when he gets turned on may be outside this perky call girl's field of expertise. Still, a little challenge every now and again stimulates the mind. It makes life so much more interesting, so she's willing to give it a shot. Ooh, I hope this is safe for YouTube. This sounds like things might get a bit saucy. This one should be exciting. Hit the play button, let's start the show. Oh my god, this is so boring. But it didn't make me confused like compiler, so I guess that's a positive. This OVA starts just as the synopsis sets it up. There's a guy, he turns into a beast when he gets aroused, he decides to call a prostitute to help him out. And then I guess she does. The two main characters meet up and have one of those typical montage scenes where a couple goes out for a night on the town, but instead of having fun in the nightlife, it's just them running around looking at strippers and porn magazines and freaking the fuck out of people since there's a giant Cthulhu monster. It's almost comedic, really. Still during the late night, we have a scene in a bar where a woman recognizes the call girl as a first-year student at her school, which means that either 1. This character that took hairstyling cues from The Bride of Frankenstein is in high school, but is out drinking late at night at a bar. Or 2. This character is an adult that is dressed up in the exact same outfit as the high school's uniform, and is just standing around at the school, which isn't weird at all. But even in the bar, she's wearing the exact same uniform, so I guess she is a high schooler. But why is she allowed to drink then? But this also means that the call girl main character, a female prostitute who accepts appointments by telephone, is in high school. This sort of thing happens every time I try to watch anime, and yet I'm still surprised and disappointed each and every time. The main male character asks the high school age prostitute why she didn't run away from him after he turned into a horrid Cthulhu monster. Her response to this, of course, being, "Even though I literally just met you, and I've only been with you for less than 2 minutes, I really like you." Aw, that's really sweet, right? Okay, so now we have the Bride of Frankenstein raping the main male character. Aw, that's really sweet too, right? Male character gets turned into an even bigger monster than before, but with the power of yelling leave, the monster that possessed him then leaves his body. It was that simple the whole time. They all live happily ever after, including the rapist who gets a job as being a prostitute. And they totally don't do the thing where they have an ending where the initial problem presented at the beginning of the story that eventually gets resolved ends up coming back at the last second but affecting someone else now. They totally don't do that trope. So we end things here and don't talk about it again because OVAs like this and Compiler never get sequels and have no reason to be thought about again. Overall, it was an underwhelming story, one that tries to be suspenseful and creepy, but fails. One that tries to be a lighthearted love story, but fails. It's like if you take some ideas from H.P. Lovecraft or Frank Long and turn them into an anime. AKA, make them bad and not good. Thankfully, it was only 30 minutes. But that doesn't even consider Call Me Tonight's gravest sin. Saying that, I guess this is no place for Freud, even though when there's anything sex related, it's always a place for Freud.
Oh, does anyone want some cocaine?
Why don't we take one more anime recommendation, then we'll call it a day. Compiler 2. Okay, very, very funny. Now let's get a real recommendation now. Compiler 2. Okay, I refuse to believe that there was a sequel made of Compiler, so give me a real recommendation now, please, okay? Yeah, thank you. Compiler 2. Swear to God. I swear to God. If this is Compiler 2 again. Compiler and assembler have been given 3 days to return the 2D world. If they do not return, the council has sworn to destroy it. How will they spend their last days on Earth? Will they be able to confess their love? If only things were that simple. Now a mysterious character is eliminating other individuals from the 2D world. Can Compiler and Assembler stop this fiend and to be together with those they love? I don't care. Just get on with it. Just as we read, we start the story and are given an expository scene with a character we've never seen before, who has an absolutely ridiculous hairstyle, and I hate it. This blonde figure, Plasma, tells Compiler that she and Assembler have to return to the 2D world. If they return, however, there will be grave consequences since they've gone against the Council's orders. But if they stay in the 3D world, they'll completely destroy it. I will say this, Compiler 2 is better than the first OVA series, but only marginally. At least the sequel has stakes in it, opening the story with a problem to be solved and giving us some sort of threat. And they actually bring up the plot point that Toshi is cheating on Assembler. Finally. You know, given their position that Compiler and Assembler are in, that they have to choose to be dead or enslaved by a council of owl people, it's pretty bad that the whole reason that they would want to stay here is because of a couple men who treat them poorly and can't be loyal for more than 5 minutes. Nachi watches a cartoon on his giant-ass TV, and you might for a second think, huh, what they're showing on the TV is a parody of the magical girl genre. Huh. And what Compiler is could be seen as a parallel to the magical girl genre in a more adult form. Huh. This is similar to how in Twin Peaks, which is in part a parody of TV soap operas, constantly had people in the show watching a soap opera on TVs within the show, which would then parallel what was going on within the story of Twin Peaks. And for this 1 second, you may consider that Compiler is a super smart deconstruction of the magical girl genre, taking the piss out of it. But then in the next second, you'd realize that you're a fucking lunatic for considering something like that, and the only reason they showed this cartoon on the TV was to have more boobs on screen and to illustrate how useless Nachi is, doing nothing but eating food and watching cartoons all day. Which, that's not something that I can relate to personally, but maybe you guys can. The villains from the first episode of Compiler 1 are inexplicably male again and are living within the 3D world. Was this signed off by the Council of Owl People? Are they supposed to be living freely in the apartment here? How did they turn back to guys? Doesn't matter because they die. By a mysterious figure. The green hair lady who was in the first episode for 3 seconds comes back. And then she dies. By a mysterious figure. Oh, and her name was Interpreter, by the way. Not like that Helps to know now, though, because she died.
By mistake.
Assembler apologizes to Toshi for the previous night. You know, where she had gotten upset that the man she's in a relationship with went on a date with another woman and kissed them right in front of her. What should happen right now is that Assembler and Compiler managed to find a way back to the 2D world and kick the Council's ass and never return to the 3D world to avoid being around Toshi and Achi ever again. But instead, Toshi gets told by the green hair lady before she died that she should stay and try to find out if Toshi does have feelings for her like she has for him. Which obviously he doesn't if he's so wishy-washy and is cheating on her. But what can you do? And so it's revealed the antagonist's identity, and they are Compiler but with blonde hair. She's an updated program of Compiler, so fittingly her name is Compiler 2. Oh my god, do you get it? She's Compiler 2 and the show is called Compiler 2. Oh, look at that. Okay guys, we need to come up with an antagonist to our main character, but we only have 3 minutes of today to figure it out. Perfect job, everyone. We'll reconvene next week to finish off everything else. Nachi confesses to Compiler, but since he's been toying with her heart for more than 2.5 years, this means nothing. Here we are, at the climax of the whole story. One last fight. One last big all scene. Compiler versus Compiler 2. Blood has been shed. People are dead. They're not dead. They're fine. And are egg people. But of course, anime and manga do this all the time to characters, distorting or chipifying their art in exaggerated ways in order to produce comical reactions. Except, no. They're just eggs. There are multiple shots of them as just eggs. I'm sure this is due to the animators not wanting to draw all the characters on screen at once in full detail, but what this ends up doing is making us question if that gun isn't made to kill or incinerate people, but if it's just made to turn people to eggs. After getting beat up some, Compiler remembers that she and Compiler are running different software versions, and that if she were to ram in an old chip into her, compatibility issues would make Compiler 2 malfunction. This has to be the best way they've implemented these chips into the story. However, this doesn't amount to anything other than a teeny tiny drip of blood. Compiler 2 says how if her OS stops running, there's a bomb inside of her that will go off and destroy the entire Earth. Seconds later, everything is fine though, and the story's resolved. Plasma goes on to say how everything happened exactly how she planned. Which is to say, Plasma knew that Interpreter would tell Assembler to always keep a disc on her so that when Assembler got turned into an egg by Compiler 2, she would then drop it so that Compiler would notice it underneath a table, pick it up and keep it, so that when Compiler fought Compiler 2, Compiler would then remember the disk and then force it into Compiler 2's system to then not accomplish anything at all other than a minor head injury to Compiler 2, so that they would then just somehow force Compiler 2's consciousness into Compiler. That's a good plan. This is a depressing fate for our main character, to have to suffer the berating thoughts of her nemesis within her own consciousness. But that's also a neat concept. A consciousness living within another consciousness, where they have to share one body. That's a story concept I've contemplated about before, so it'd be interesting to see how someone else would go about it. Except, our story ends here, and it's all over, and there's no third Compiler, so we never get to see anything cool. Alright everyone, what did we learn here today? It's that the creator of Compiler went on to design Vest from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and that even after over 2 decades, they never learned that those hairs at the top always look stupid and ridiculous.